This panel is about revitalization of Lopud, and I suppose the trigger for this has been in June when we opened the pavilion and we had those inauguration ceremonies. I was very much encouraged by Mark Wigley, who is the Dean of Architecture of Columbia University, about the fact that he thought it was very interesting that somebody was completely committed to conservation and restoration and be equally driven to work in contemporary art in a very adventurous way. And that I always considered this to be a weakness because I thought, no, sorry, it's my own phone. I thought it was a weakness because as I'm a Gemini, with a Gemini rising, everybody says to me that I'm not focused and that my projects are all over the place and that, you know, I'm sending out mixed messages all the time and doing too many different occupations. So it was really, for me, really encouraging to have this support from Mark. And he introduced me to Jorge Otero Perez, who's a Spanish, he's the actual head of the conservation studies in Columbia University. And the two of them came. Mark Wigley's wife is Beatriz Colombina, and she is actually professor of advanced studies of architecture in Princeton University. And these three people came here and were absolutely blown away by the integration of so many disciplines within the island, which led to us feeling confident that it was in a way participating to the revitalization of Lopud. So we had this panel already before, and actually Dinko was in this panel. We had a really interesting guy from Kosovo as well on the panel talking about a hammam that was being restored in Pristina, and we had a sort of very mixed group of people. And again, I'd just like to run through who's on the panel, and I also want you all to feel that you can throw in and interrupt and participate. We're not going to have question time at the end, so if you want to join in the discussions whilst we're talking, this is to emphasize the lack of formality of these panels and these discussions. Konstantin, I don't need to introduce you, met him yesterday. You have to introduce yourself. I'm sorry, my darling, because I'm not as familiar with you and your work as I should be.
Should I start now? Or?
Yeah, just who you are.
Okay, my name is Sejla Kamerić and I'm born in Sarajevo and I do art. I was unfortunately during the siege and war in Sarajevo, so that in many ways influenced my whole life and directed the way that my artwork is going. And now I live in Berlin, and I do some project that I can later on talk about. Mm-hmm. But I do, as I before worked in advertising and as an art director, and switched in 2000 from advertising to art because I felt really suffocated in that field of as my vocation is a graphic designer. So I switched to art because I needed to work in a public space and I needed to feel more free, and that's how actually my art career started.
Doesn't go.
And now it's great, I guess.
Okay, thanks. Russell Haswell is a musician, composer, ex-curator of music and sound for PS1 in New York, and the author of tonight's program together with Florian Hacker. Is that okay? And Dinko Peračić is an architect from Split, and he's also participating in an organization called Intelligent Coast, which I gather is trying to learn of all the mistakes of the Spanish model. It's actually a Spanish organization that is advising actually Croatia on tourism, and instead of recommending the money-spinning Costa Blanca model, which has destroyed one of the most beautiful coasts in the Mediterranean, which was adopted earlier in Croatia, there's now the counter effect of like, let's actually learn from those mistakes as opposed from recreating the worst disaster. And so Christina Leto is an artist, one of the first artists from Croatia that I bought a piece from. And we have it in an installation in our exhibition in Vienna right now and shooting back. And it's a work about the milkmaids of Croatia. And I thought that she was explaining to me in some detail how this artwork really turned things around and helped people perceive some of the traditions by looking at it from a very contemporary perspective. And I'd really like you to tell us about that project later on. And since we lost François Roche, we lost François Roche and we lost Louis Benech, who are involved in the revitalization of the gardens here on Lopud, I thought just to introduce you to Christopher Gierke, because he's a fascinating person I've known for 25 years, one of my oldest friends, and he's married to this very beautiful Mongolian girl who sang for you last night. And he's been involved in the revitalization of the Orkhan Valley in Mongolia, which is another extraordinary national park, remote region of Mongolia, very near Karakorum, the old capital of Genghis Khan. And I think let's also hear a little bit about some people that have just thrown themselves life with their soul and their heart into reviving an area, and some of the things that he's learned from that experience. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So then I'll start a little bit with the introduction. I'd like to just know how many people have seen the monastery, even in pitch dark? Everybody? More or less? Who has seen the pavilion? Also, more or less? And nobody's seen the historical gardens, basically. So that's the only one you haven't seen. So there is a triangle in my mind what's going on in Lopud, and the historical gardens is something we've only just started embarking on. And these are a very formal Renaissance gardens with terraces and little, crossroads, and as you can imagine, something that has been, occupied by lots of little local neighbors who have been growing their vegetables and hanging their laundry out to dry in true Croatian style. And they basically adopt and take over every little piece of land, because over the last 30, 40 years, you can imagine there was a shortage of food and people had an economy where they had to grow their own food. So it's been quite a job getting people to understand that there is a reason to actually start to move them out slowly in a gentle and kind way and considerate way, because it's part of their life now and they consider those gardens theirs. And bring these back to life and create another activity, if you want, or something for people to visit on the island that is actually historical reconstruction of these Renaissance gardens, which are very beautiful, and there are a number of them in this region, but very few of them are open to the public. I don't know if anybody also should take a minute, and this is not connected to me, but go and visit the Arboretum, which is just there. And you walk all the way back into the back and you'll see some old pine and cypress trees that are over 200 years old. And it's just the restoration of and cleaning up of this garden has been done by the locals, and it's really beautiful. So on Lopud, slowly over the years, I've been involved in this restoration project. And I've gone through a number of architects, and I got a number of architectural proposals, and I've had to learn from scratch what restoring a monument is all about, because I have no training in that field. So all of the experience that I can share with you is real personal anecdotes. And I'm not going to repeat myself for anything that I said in the monastery yesterday. But really, just to summarize, really has been a meter by meter an acceptance of what is there, and trying my damnedest to try and preserve not only the atmosphere and to bring those monument back to life, but also to maintain some old fabric in there, the original patina and the authentic feeling of this building. And at the same time, try to imagine a future for it, which goes beyond it just being a summer house for me and my family. And this is similar to what Christopher and Enke started off doing, sort of going to their valley where they lived and where her family is from, and then setting up a small camp there and bringing some friends, and then this thing grew and grew and grew. And I realized that the monastery is also a wonderful venue for inviting people to have these kind of get-togethers, and we intend to be using it as a seminar location. So with a bit of luck, you'll come back and we'll spend time in the monastery instead of here. And the fortress in the back is a really primary venue for sound, music and performance. So we are going to be installing a recording studio in the back there. And this is of course something that raised a lot of eyebrows in the Institute of Preservation of Monuments. And my general experience with institutions, whether they be in Croatia or anywhere else. They're highly bureaucratic and very complicated and difficult to work with. But at the same time, they're absolutely paralyzed with rules. And what I learned from my discussions with Mark Wegley is that even in a field of very over-regulated conservation restoration, particularly of historical landmarks, where they will not let you do a number of things which actually make complete sense in terms of how you want to reuse the property. And I think that there has been a word that was used in the trade, let's say, which is called adaptive reuse, which was picked up in the 50s and 60s when a lot of old monuments were sort of transformed into something else to give them back at least a life. And so the adaptive reuse of a building is still within respect of its land, of its layout. And I think that in the case of the fortification in the back and the fortress, it makes much more sense to sort of break a few rules and to sensitively install technical equipment that makes performance possible without every time you have a performance seeing, like you see all over Dubrovnik when they have an event in one of the forts, is these thick piles of cables that go from the control all the way draping around the rooms and the walls, and have these black rubber cables that are then brought in and taken out every single time you have a performance. So again, this is part of, in my mind, revitalization, because you actually bring something to use on a more permanent basis than have to consider how much it costs to install all that technical equipment in and out and take it in and out. So, Russell, you're the first to go. You're going to be performing tonight, and I'd really like you to ask you first how you imagine the fortress. You've been working on it now for a couple of weeks, and you've performed there before. You know what its potential is, and maybe just through our discussion together we can sort of explore that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, basically the studio side of it, in a way, I guess, is kind of invisible, because it will be located inside the fortress itself, and so it's not really there to be seen, as it were, apart from if you're using it. But within the fortress walls, the idea there is to create an environment that would, in terms of sound presentation and performance, that it could accommodate a very varied array of possible artist performance type, etc., etc. But to make, as you just mentioned, things like cables running everywhere, etc., to make these things again invisible. So there's ways that we're going to do things like have optical cables, so that we don't have to have these massive multi-cores and so on, which we can do now. But the idea is that the people of you which visited yesterday, you saw there was a big screen on one wall. So there's the possibility that in some way it could be used as a kind of ad hoc cinema or a projection screen. At the same time there would be a stage in front of this area, but the stage could be moved, so there could be things presented in a more formal stage audience, or in the round, or actually not have a stage, or, well, basically as many open possibilities as possible. And things like PA, lighting, and well, those two elements will be as invisible as possible to retain the look of, obviously, of the fortress.
So not to create an intervention that is an eyesore, but it's
yes,
sort of respectful and within.
Very respectful.
What I'd like to ask you really is, apart from what's actually going to happen in there, is the fortress itself is extraordinary space, and by including into it some very, very innovative and special technology, and having somebody of your, who has that incredible experience but very definitive sound and record, the ability to record practically a three-dimensional sound And your idea is also to diffuse sound into a myriad of speakers around the space.
Yeah.
I mean, how as an artist does this make coming to perform here an attraction? Because to me, when you have a historical site and then you have the vision to implement into it very extraordinary new technology, and the combination of these two things is what would attract very special artists to come here. And when you get the very special artists coming here, that is also participating in revitalization, because when all of a sudden people go, wow, Keith Jarrett's going to play at Lopud instead of some completely unknown Croatian, piano player, right? Nothing against the Croatian, I'm sure he's also really but if do you see that as a musician, as a performer yourself, as the attraction being a combination of these things?
Definitely.
Because I think
because the location's obviously incredible. I mean, if you're not from here, to come here, for me to come here is totally amazing from my inner city hellhole that I originate from. So it's completely heavenly and deluxe and special. And the fortress, obviously, and if we have these, when the PA system is implemented in the fortress, it will be of a standard and a quality which I fetishize and fancy at every performing opportunity I have. But it never really happens. It's always somehow compromised, or we're trying to achieve my ideal in terms of the equipment, the space. And from performing there already, Florian and I were astounded by the acoustic qualities in the space. When we first arrived, we didn't know if it would be a kind of hellish reverberation chamber or not. And after performing, we realised that was not the case, and that it was a wonderful environment to play the material that we were presenting. We heard other types of music in there later, when there was a DJ playing, and it proved to us in that one day that this was a great location. It was a great place to listen to any form of sound, really, I imagine. And only our programme can.
Would you agree that then part of revitalisation of some old historical fabric is also the fact that it becomes inspirational to contemporary artists, performers, and so on, and that the fact that it becomes a centre of creativity is something that really contributes to that revitalisation?
200%. I mean, completely. It's, after performing there once, I think Florian and I both said to each other that we want to do it again, and we'd like to do it again and again and again. I haven't played in such a nice place anywhere else.
Sejla, you must have been involved in several projects in Sarajevo that have had that same quality.
Yes, and I think it's interesting to compare how, because in Sarajevo after the war, of course, it was the question of reconstructing the city, but also how to revitalize what we are doing in contemporary art, and how to involve the people and community there, because after the war we had a lack of actually public for the art, and all the institutions were either demolished or totally closed for any kind of art activity which would bring and educate new public. So the way how we actually or Center for Contemporary Art in Sarajevo did things was going out to the street and creating the new public, and one of the first project was in old Hammam bar, which was a long time in ex-Yugoslavia, in 50s already demolished and was just a junkyard. And after the war it was kind of cleaned up and used as a summer garden with a horrible music, with just just like a coffee bar or place without any program or any use. But the Center of Contemporary Art and Dunja Blažević as director decided really to use that kind of place, not to create the new one, to build, to ask for money, to build a new building, but to go to this kind of old place which was lost all the significance of the historical one, but also in a way that it was used. And it was the first annual exhibition of the Center for Contemporary Art, where the artists had opportunity to make a public works, and each project was only for 7 or 10 days, and then we switched, and it lasted whole summer. And by that kind of activities, every summer they made the annual exhibition. So in a way, the whole art scene and us as a generation of the artists who grew up during the war start to build up our careers in direction that we are open to every public, not exclusively to the public that would go to the museum gallery. And somehow, and also in the same time, the new art public was created, and people no longer would question when they see something odd for them in the street, is that art or not? But they would really go and see it as maybe it's interesting. Let's see what it is, and start to involve in different things that they could see on the streets. I would like to tell you one of the projects that I did with the Center for Contemporary Art, and in a frame of this annual exhibition. They in 2003 did a project because the National Gallery in Sarajevo was reconstructed by money from the Swiss government, and they were doing a facade work, and a scaffolding was around the whole building. But in the same time, in the National Gallery, although the international community, including the Swiss government, were financing this reconstruction, and in the gallery, in the museum, the director of the museum was not so open, or didn't know how to actually make the program, what to do now. So, but luckily she was open and allowed the Center for Contemporary Art to make an exhibition outside of the building of museum on the scaffolding. And each artist proposed a project, and it was again this switch, like 2 weeks for each work. And my proposal for this exhibition, which was called Under Construction, was to make a huge banner with the sign occupied. It would just say occupied. And the reason why I proposed such a thing was that, in a way, first of all, after the war, this word occupied had many different meaning, and bizarrely and strangely enough, after the war, on the front lines, we could see houses, and very near Sarajevo, you could see houses with the graffitis that soldiers would make.
The occupied soldiers.
I mean,
technique.
Yes, but also the others. I mean, all army Bosnians, because they would, like, first troops would come and occupy this place, but that wasn't enough for them. They would go and write occupied Serbs, and then like Bosnians would come, and then they would and then they say like occupied, and it was this bizarre way of not only occupying a space with the violence, with the guns, but occupying a space and having the idea that you need to write down that the space is occupied. So that's of course the context that was very much important for me just after the war, where Sarajevo and whole Bosnia-Herzegovina was trying to deal with this memories of war and trauma, but also the institutional context was very important for me, because as a young artist, and because of lack of money and lack of openness from the institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we didn't have any opportunity to get in them. They were occupied by the old collections, by old artists. Their depots were full of things, and they didn't have space or opportunity. I mean, the space were not good enough to even show the things and artworks that they have in collections. So of course they were not thinking even of buying a new things, but not even buying, but exhibiting new things. So they were really occupied physically and psychologically, that nothing new should happen, and that you can't really
That
produce.
doesn't only happen in war zones, by
Of
the way.
course.
That's everywhere.
That's
Ask Nina in Iceland. They never had a war ever, but it's the same thing.
And that I think in that way was and of course that's the again this struggle between institution and how to. So that and the reason why I'm telling you this is again to go out in the public and how the public reacted, because for the opening of the exhibition, so the first work that was shown was my work with this huge two banners saying just occupied on this green material that cover a facade. And we were going around and just like listening what the people were saying, and lots of old people were in the park just across the street from that. And also there is a bus station, so different people were of course seeing that work every day, and once then in one moment I overheard a conversation on the bus stop about like, it's occupied, so somebody bought this building. And it was the first sign for me of transition in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because from that on everything was who bought what in a cultural way, who gave money and got the right to work in that place, but also in physical, who bought which building, who will reconstruct it, who will do what, and slowly the whole country was, like just being overtaken with this atmosphere, like should we sell our river, should we sell our mountain now, and in a lack of factories and other properties. So, and the luckily after the exhibition, luckily, the director of this National Gallery really opened her mind, and she wasn't very anymore so occupied with the problems of infrastructure, because they kind of got the first funding from different sides, and they made the first exhibition in the gallery, which was 100 years of art in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they asked us young artists to they approached us with a wish to buy works, but as they didn't have money, or that money was just not even worth mentioning, most of us decided to give them the works just for free, because it was, and I also did that, and it was important for me to see that banner again on the building, because now with the new facade, with the white, and then it was again how the society functioned, that many people were recognizing that building, because that exhibition lasted for like 2-3 years. They didn't change, so they made it in 2004, and until now it was basically this year they changed. So most of the people recognized the building of the National Gallery of Bosnia and Herzegovina as an occupied building, because they call it by my sign. So, and that was again a sign how you have to work much more and much harder to approach people, and how to get them in the gallery, and to show more.
It makes me feel that just basically one piece was enough to actually change the whole dynamics of an institution. Is that possible? I mean, without you sounding your own trumpet too much, but it sounds to me like...
It was because I know personally, and I respect this lady very much, who's director of the gallery. I know that first when Dunja Blažević, director of the SSCA, came with all the works and all the proposals from the artists, the director of the National Gallery was against putting the sign occupied. She was like, no, how could we do like that? No, but is it? And then luckily the Dunja Blažević, which was the amazing person who did so much to art scene in Bosnia-Herzegovina, she persuaded her that it's nothing against her personally, and in this institution that it could change. And on the end, she was the one who approached me and who understood that work, that she needs something to be out and that she needs...
Well, in a way, the way I read it is that very often these institutions were all about, well, we have our program and people have to come to us, into us, to actually have an experience. And I think what it might have taught her was actually we need to reach out and like you said, find that new audience and cultivate entire new audience out of new people that would then come and start wanting to come to that institution. Otherwise, so it's sending the message outwards rather than in. I'd like to just go on a little bit about Sarajevo because I find it's a place that we all spoke about so much years ago, and you know now we don't hear so much what's going on in Sarajevo. But I remember during the war, to me the biggest tragedy during the destruction of Sarajevo was the systematic bombing of the library. And this library probably contained some of the most relevant, did contain the most, it's like losing the Library of Alexandria, if I may compare, because it contained the entire archive from medieval times till now of this entire Balkan region, if you will, and all of these different cultures that have actually either coexisted or occupied each other over centuries. This whole diversity and richness and all of the literary production that was housed in this building. And I do remember that there was some rumors that some people managed to save some of the books. In principle, 90% of it was burnt. And then afterwards, the European Union sort of embraced this as like their symbol of reconstruction. And what in the end happened? Did they actually rebuild a library? Was there a program to have countries from all around the world donate books, or was it turned into a museum, or did it become a parliament, or what happened in the end? Nothing.
That's the saddest thing.
No.
It's the empty thing. It's not finished. Reconstruction is not finished, and the way how the reconstruction was done is just shameful. It's just every time I go there, because you can go, sometimes they make some kind of events inside, which is horrible as well. But it's every time I want to cry when I see how badly they did it and how they just stopped. And now
it's nothing.
It's not. It's nothing. It's not finished because, for example, you had this beautiful vitrage on the ceiling, which is just amazing, and I remember it from. It was just this atmosphere going, and they didn't have money to made it properly, so they just put the glass. Now it's just the dirty glass. Ceiling, and it's just horrible.
But it's behind. It's still there in a state of decomposition, or what?
They closed it because they. I don't know so much about it, but they closed it because they wanted to close the building so the rain and the water wouldn't go in. They reconstructed the columns because that was the first thing that needed to be made. So
but this dome was destroyed then. It was bombed and it crashed.
It was bombed, burned, and then from the water that was going, then the parts were
finished.
Yeah, and of course used as a.
How do you feel about that?
There is a word that was introduced. That we started to use just after the library was burned. And it was urbicid, and
was what?
Urbicid, and the word. I wouldn't go too deeply into to explaining the word, but the reason why it was it well represented what we were feeling, because it wasn't anymore the fear that you have for your life, but then you see that everything that you treasure is being systematically killed in one way or another. And in the same time you had to struggle between crying, because I was a teenager when the war started, so and the first losses for me, for example, when I saw on the first days of the war in siege of Sarajevo, they bombed the Olympic Museum and they burned that building as well. Very beautiful Austro-Hungarian building which is still as well as a library empty, nothing is happening. So I was crying when I saw that, because somehow as a young girl going to the art school, I was imagining that I will have my first exhibition there, because they had a beautiful gallery space. And I started to cry when I heard that the Olympic Museum is burning, and I was like, I couldn't stop crying. And my father came and told me, like, just buildings are something that we can fix. Just never cry over buildings. Just people are important, and just we are important. And unfortunately, unfortunately, then my close friends and family members, including my father, were killed in the war. So then you feel what is the real loss. And the saddest thing is, again, that the people are the one who can fix things. And the sad thing is that now, which makes me so upset, and in the same time wanting to be in Sarajevo, to fight, but then not knowing who to fight with, to see how the whole country went in one direction that you can't return it. Because I think that the worst harm in architectural way was done after the war. And that is why it's so important to think how, like in one moment in which direction you go and who to. So now we will have the highest building in Balkan, but our national library is
nothing.
Nothing.
Is it earmarked for something? Is that building earmarked for becoming a library again, and they just ran out of money? I mean, what's the actual incentive?
They ran out of the money, but there is a big, again, fight in the government and in the institution who will get it. The library is fighting, of course, to get it back, but the library is not strong enough and doesn't have a power to get it or money. In the same time, they were talk that they will sell it to someone, which is, again,
sell it.
Yeah, that was also one of the in one moment just after the war, there was this kind of idea of some culture workers to preserve it as it is, as a monument of the construction, which was, I was kind of against it, because I didn't think that should represent that should be a monument. But now I think maybe that was the better idea than to
They should rebuild the Banyan Buddhas in there, maybe. I mean, it's basically an undecided bureaucratic quagmire with no respect to it.
Yes,
I mean, just to throw in a slight parallel, Andrei Heta, was his name? Albert Heta from Pristina, as an artist from Pristina, came here because he was completely upset about the fact there's this historic hammam in Pristina, and there's this project that the European Union would fund to restore the hammam, to turn it into a European cultural center. And this is, in my mind, the worst type of cultural colonization which the European Union is guilty of, all in the name of multicultural get-together, right? Which is the biggest BS, really. And he said, apart from the fact that nobody's going to go there, the fact that if you restored it as a hammam, everybody would go there, because the hammam was the place where everybody went from all cultures, not just this. But they're so desperately trying to remove the traces of the Albanian population and all things Islamic. It's, to my mind, this was totally true, the story that you told about the cultural monuments being the primary targets, because all of this genocide and all of this cultural ethnic cleansing that was really part of this war, such a primary focus of this war, was to make tabula rasa of all the major monuments. Let's not list how many mosques have been car parks, because they didn't just destroy the mosques, they then came in with bulldozers the next day, removed the rubble, and put the tarmac down faster than you could count to 3. Okay, so you don't even have any remnant, ruin, or trace of anything. Same thing with graveyards, same thing. Monuments, museums, libraries, any type of archive that might have people's names or marriage certificates or birth registers. I mean, this was systematic, not only in Bosnia-Herzegovina, also in Croatia. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of foreign people here. I'm just having to sort of bring this this goosebump stuff up. Sorry to talk about it again.
I have to tell you, just because I have an urge to tell that story, because it's the most horrible story about the culture, our heritage in Bosnia, what happened with it. The oldest mosque in Bosnia and Herzegovina which was built before Ottoman Emperor came
14 something.
And it was bombed, destroyed, burned, nothing remained. So then historians and volunteers came to kind of do something with it, and then they found and identified each stones, and were working like for 3 years on that. And in one moment, during the winter, they didn't have any money, because they were coming there as a volunteer, just because they knew how important it is to at least preserve the
footprints.
The footprints, the part of them. And the next thing what happened, the Islam community in Bosnia and Herzegovina got the money from Malaysian government to rebuild that mosque. And they asked UN forces to help them without contacting anyone who worked. And they built a brand new mosque on on that place, and they used these old stones. The UN used the old stones, and they built a road to the mosque with that stones. And that's the end. So nothing was left from that, not even like piece of stone that you could say that was. And so it's a horror to live through horror, and then to, after the war, to experience even, in some way, even worse horror.
I think I'd like to move from the very material, revitalization of material buildings and historical sites, to the revival or the protection and preservation of more traditions, Kristina, because I think that your work, the first work that I came in touch with, has that quality, and maybe you could also explain, why you did the project, describe the project a bit, and how it actually had a repercussion.
So in 2002, 2003, I realized the project dedicated to Zagreb milkmaids, and there is a website with the archive of 6 main markets in Zagreb. You can search through the days and the market, and you can locate the milkmaids, because there are like 600 women who are coming still from the suburbs, outskirts of Zagreb, sometimes 30 kilometers, coming to town, selling cheese and cream. And this is like northern Croatia. It's a thing we eat. It's Like,
I asked for some for breakfast and I didn't get any, so things are serious.
So anyhow, there is due to economical development, the markets are disappearing, farmer markets are disappearing. On the other hand, there is EU regulations which are then threatening the production itself, because one has to have a big cooler unit and this and that, and all these women and the families are very small producers, and they don't have funds to finance refrigerator on the market or a cooling unit. So, and still this is like it's a kind of trademark of Zagreb, or it's milkmaids and also women who are selling fruits. It's a kind of tradition to, if there is something going on in a society, you can very often people refer to what milkmaid will say, or what this kumica, we call them, what they would say. And there is also this culture of going to the market, and then you have long-term relationships between the family of a milkmaid and the family of a bar, which is going through generations. So from my mother to grandmother to mother, the milkmaids is also. So there is all this quality of life that is within this traditional profession. So with a non-governmental organization, we did a documentation about the women, and we tried to put out on the table to see what is the public opinion on that, and what people think and what's going on, because their average age is pretty high, and usually very little of them have an ancestor, somebody to take over the business. And in the course of the project, we also had a small media campaign, and journalists responded, in fact, very creatively. Usually they just copy the press release you give them, and then that's it. But here, somehow people could identify. Why? Because there is in the milkmaids population, there is a decline. Their business is going down, and it's also parallel to the what's going on in the transition period from the late socialistic period, where everybody was well off, and then to this war, and then transition. So some middle class has dropped the quality of life and the standard. So people identified quite emotionally also. And also then the politicians took over the cheese and cream as a syntagm, and there were now I'm working on a documentary film that would show how they use this issue in different politicians for different purposes.
So when they have guests, like visiting diplomats,
so where
or
there
government,
is a high official from European Parliament, then it took him to the market, and then he has to taste cheese and cream, and I said, well, this is like that. Anyhow, there is the whole. Now it's like amazing. There is also Janica, our famous ski. Skier. She also, for the purposes of advertising the race.
Maybe I can continue
Yeah.
on this. Of course, on this island there is like 120 people living, and we cannot expect that they reproduce themselves until the number of, you said 4,000, or how many?
No, this is this guy that is he's restoring the ruins there.
Yeah.
So this will be one day.
4,000, yeah. I mean, it probably
That's
will
his
be,
vision.
maybe it will be one day, but then I doubt that there will be the people that are somehow the sons and the daughters from all those people that are living here, and traditionally they've been living here. Some new people will come, and some new flows will emerge. Now we don't talk so much. I mean, what is much more interesting than talking about tourism, because tourism, or let's say the excursionism are like those people on the boats here that are coming once and they're leaving. But there is a huge capacity in the people that are travelers and that are some kind of temporary inhabitants. Like I'm here for a second time. Francesca, you are here almost living. Konstantin is as well on Starigrad, as well living there. You are becoming kind of temporary inhabitants of the place. So you are some kind of social power of the place. And when you combine the not only the people that are actually enjoying their time on such a places, but as well people that are coming because of the work, these seasonal workers. When you prolong the season and you have seasonal workers living here for 7-8 months, they are your inhabitants. The culture will completely change according to this. So we have to count on these new people, and this is really interesting how such a places can attract different people to really create a social tissue. And what kind of social tissue will it be? And can we actually play with this social tissue? Can we manipulate? Can we choose the people that we want? Can we choose our future culture? Can we choose our future society? Of course, this is all very, very tricky ideas because it's kind of social manipulation. But I mean, in some terms, why not? You know, why not to predict our future? Why not to play with our future? Who are your neighbors? Why wouldn't be on a Lopud maybe like 2 persons more like you, and then you were gonna have like many different intersected activities and many different things going on. So this is, I think it's really crucial to talk about these transversal cultures on places like Lopud is, where you have the combination of the local life, which has its roots, but you have these temporary workers and temporary leisure inhabitants that are somehow mixing together and creating a common culture. And when you think about how you can actually make it, how you can play with this idea, how you can provoke it, how you can create a trigger for this, I think initiatives like this one, which is has roots in very much in culture and philanthropy, is of course the best possible scenario that you can imagine, because it's attracting people that are bringing very recognizable qualities and very and kind of quite a lot of the active content, and that's something that I would like a little bit to discuss. I would since it was Sejla and Kristina, they've been talking about their projects. The things that I was interested in, what they've been saying, is this active content, which is inside this, is inside their works. You know, it is when you have, let's say, it is washing powder. There is always listed how much was the percentage of the active content in this washing powder. There is, I don't know, in developed countries it's 20, in kind of undeveloped countries it's 10%, let's say. But the rest is a decoration, or it gives smell, it gives some kind of other things. But the real active content that does the thing is it. So what they've been saying is all their works are very much focused on this active content, that it actually creates some kind of change inside.
I also like the decoration part.
Yeah. No, but this is something that is kind of bringing changes. No, that's what we are talking about, because the revitalization, I see it as a kind of it's not for me as a kind of just an exhibition or just an one night show, or just one thing that is kind of one event per se, and it doesn't have this power to be continued. You know, this revitalization that we are talking about in the case of the monastery, in the case of Lopud, is actually very active thing, and it has to stay like this. So these active contents from the works that are brought, when you imply it, or created, when you bring it to the place, it's really interesting to observe what kind of changes they produce, what kind of manipulations of the reality it produces. Those walls of the monastery, I mean, they have some symbolic value, but without bringing in some kind of devices, some kind of toys, some kind of protocol, some kind of ceremonies, some kind of environments, some kind of flows that are that are active, you know, that are provoking people to do something. There is they are nothing, you know, they are just a passive walls, and that's something that is for me really interesting. And one other thing, if the monastery is one of the epicenters, other one is the pavilion, this place is the third one. It's really interesting to observe which place has this revitalizing power more in the local context. I think this place for now, for us, has a very good capacity. Maybe the pavilion has a bigger capacity, a kind of active power for the local citizens. And if you are thinking further on, I think the direction of the works, for me, it would be interesting to observe and see the works that are created in a way that are really having manipulative intentions. They are really want to manipulate with the people. They want to manipulate the space. They want to bring some kind of transformations inside. So that is one example. Let's say for that is there is one good thing in Zadar made by architect Nikola Bašić. Probably a lot of you saw this thing. These are these steps that go down to the sea, and this kind of sea organ. When the waves come inside, then these steps produce the sound. And it's kind of a really basic thing. It's kind of a piece of public art or kind of an installation, permanent one. But it's a magnet for the people, and it's really interesting how it has transformed the flows of people that are walking along Riva in Zadar. How this has become a magnet and a kind of place where people gather, and they just start to behave different. They start to feel different. They start to encounter different, and so on. So basically, what I'm interested in, and the thing that I would like to discuss further on, is are those objects and devices, but as well ceremonies. Last time with François Roche, we've been talking about ceremonies that we could introduce to bring changes in the local conditions.
Goshi, you got anything to add to that about the different?
In a sense, I want to develop it and just basically to ask questions. And there are quite a few questions. And of course, it's a unique situation, and you're in the unique situation because remembering the famous text of François Rabelais about intellectual monastery as an ideal model for intellectual interaction, you have possibility to create such intellectual monastery. You have the walls. But what is the task of this institution? And what kind of levels it's approaching? Of course, we have local level, which is island of Lopud, which is probably the most problematic, because how to interact on the local level, I personally cannot really understand how it's possible to involve them, how it's possible to make this thing really important for them, not just as a presence of something foreign and strange. I'm not sure that if they will, they will see the pavilion, what will be their feeling, I don't know. Maybe you monitor this and you can answer this question. The second level, which is simpler and doable, it's, let's say, the level of Dubrovnik. Do you want people from Dubrovnik come here? Do you want to make this island attractive for, maybe not for mass tourists, but for the strata of middle class, intelligent people who are coming now to Dalmatia, and they are coming? Do you want create like strong cultural interaction with art world in Dubrovnik, which is easier? The next level is Croatia in general. Do you want this institution to become, in a sense, a player? Do you want to give something to Croatian art community? Because you are in the unique situation, you are here, you are in this country. This country is not spoiled at all by too many cultural institutions. We can count them on the fingers of one hand. Do you want to do this? And the last level is the international level, which is basically the easiest. It's very funny because this is the easiest part of the program. It's we can imagine what could happen. We basically already participate in such event. so people can come from different countries. But can you just try to answer these questions? What do you think about Croatian level? What do you think about Dubrovnik? What do you think about Lopud as such? What is your vision of this story?
That's such a difficult question. I wish you'd told me you were going to ask me this yesterday. I would have not slept last night.
But I wanted you to sleep.
Shit! Who asked you to come here anyway? Oh, can we have some wine, please? These are really hard questions to answer, and I have to say, when we started this, I had the excuse to say this is an experiment, because the experiment started in Venice, and the pavilion being in Venice, we still managed to put it in an island that was a good 45 minutes away from main center Venice, San Marcos. And people had to make the effort to go there and to come back, and the little vaporettos were not the most convenient horaire and timetables. Exactly the same thing happened here when we had printing our brochures 2 weeks before we were opening. We still didn't get from the local postera the schedule for the summer, and the mayor in all her brilliance had actually managed to cancel half of the ferry service. So we felt totally like strangled with what our accessibility, how accessible can we say we are going to be. The entire front road here was dug up. They were decided, although it was supposed to have started in February, March, they decided June was the right month to dig up the entire street from La Foggia to the monastery to lay down the water pipes, which they've been promising us for 3 years. And it wasn't until I managed to get a Croatian television team out here to do a little bit of a preview of the pavilion that they had to literally climb over an incredible concrete rubble to get up there, let alone what Igor had to do to get 16 tons of wood and steel up the hill across this huge ravine that was built from the boat, the ferry that brought it over. And they filmed this like catastrophe, and luckily, this is shown on Croatian TV the same evening, and miracles of all miracles, within a week, the road was back, So I thought, okay, first check, because all of the local villagers were absolutely incensed at the fact that their entire business, which they wait for all year round to start in June, was totally compromised because they couldn't put a single table and chair out in their cafes to start serving coffee and ice cream and so on. So there was this the island was just absolutely going insane. And I think the first thing that happened was that the arrival of the pavilion, and therefore the media, signaled that this road was then fixed as a result of that. So I sort of realized that luckily, it was one of those things that went in my favor, that we suddenly got everybody on our side super fast, which was not the most obvious thing. So from a local area, I have to say that the community were the first to say, yes, we'd love to have this project. We then managed to get the mayor, and then managed to get the Ministry of Culture. So that was sort of starting locally, going into regional, and then going national. When I compare the institution in Zagreb, which is now dedicated to the Museum of Contemporary Art, which they're building a huge, massive, monster, huge mega building, they are fighting between the two political parties that have been involved in this, as to who will be the director for the last year and a half. And as a result, they don't have a director, they really don't have a program. They basically can't open. They were supposed to open next week. And it's still a building site because it's unfinished and the money has stopped. And it's like a little bit... And I must say that the over-politicization of art and culture in Croatia is what's killing it. But it's not only Croatia, it's Bosnia and Herzegovina, also in Austria it's the same thing. So it's not like this is a unique problem. So whether I want to be a player within that community and that scene, I'm very hesitant, I have to say, to answer. This is from my heart. I'm much more interested in Lopud. because I think there's much more to be achieved here. I mean, there's not only just revitalization, there's also, you know, the way they put the garbage here. I'm thinking, Dinko, help me work this out. You know, there's how you recycle, teaching people how to take care. I mean, every 2 days, everybody from the room gets the entire garbage and all the broken glass thrown on this jetty in front of our hotel. And these are things, all the crap, when the Gand was open, I mean, you couldn't swim in this area. I mean, I saw it, people were complaining about the amount of cigarette butts there are on the beaches. You wouldn't know the amount of shit you have to swim in, because there's no proper, you know, septic tank, sewage. I mean, you know, it's just, it's middle, you know, there's certain things that really need to be addressed on the island that are far beyond my capacity, if you want, as somebody who's coming here and doing projects. So I really would like to focus on one place and focus on the diversity of the projects and continuously bring people here and sort of create an atmosphere on the island which can become a model atmosphere for other people to take similar activities. You know, Stari Grad has a really great cultural scene going on. And I really enjoyed visiting there. You've got some really good galleries, you've got lectures and musical program, which is done in a very sort of respectful way, and sort of everything is quite small. You're not trying to be big, you know, and compete. And I think these parts of Croatia, things should be kept small. And I don't think that there is, in my mind, also because I'm a private and I realize how in Vienna I'm perceived. You know, Daniela and I suffer constantly by being ignored by the big institutions. And you know, played against actually, and the fact that a small private institution can do so well and in fact operate in so many different countries, which I think is very good for Austria and for Vienna. We are a bit of a international roving ambassador of an Austrian, you know, institution, a small private but still very active and spoken about in the United States, to Iceland, to Turkey, to Australia, to wherever. And this is not at all considered. It's not something that we're flattered by. You know, the Austrians just judge us on whether we got any local money from the government to pay for a project and why we should get money and they didn't get money. That's the main focus of the campaigns with when we're written about. It's improving, I have to say, but I just think that there's always this jealousy and insecurity that, you know, the bigger institutions have against the small NGOs, against the startup, against private initiative. And that's why it's very difficult for us, even though I have enough of an influence also and financing to be able to rise above it, which of course most NGOs don't have. But that's a little bit also why the focus of these seminars is to bring other initiatives together so that we can feel a little bit of a community, because I'm feeling that that's what's missing. So for me, it's more creating a community of like-minded people who also struggle with the same issues and who also want to gain confidence in thinking out of the box, which is really what I finished my talk with yesterday. So those are the parameters at the moment, and I think step by step we'll see how things develop. And I'm not somebody who ever makes plans, because whenever I plan anything, as everybody who works with me knows, I change my mind. And I shift directions as fast as the wind changes in this part of the world. And I'm constantly adapting to where I think, oh, this is more, let's focus on this year. Let's think about doing, you know, and it's an organic transformation by at the same time bringing in something that's very different and very thought-provoking. I mean, I think there is an element one should look at is, do you parachute in something that is going to create a tidal wave and go shock value? Or do you bring something in organically and slowly and let ripple effect happen? And when the first few parts of the pavilion were being erected, I mean, they were all going, what's she building, a bungalow? I mean, of course the mentality was it had to be some kind of living quarter and little mini bungalow that you can rent out to tourists. And then of course this black room with the white line going, and they were like totally, I mean, I'll have to tell you another time about the first cocktail I gave to the local community and the wheelbarrow with the beers in it, and you know, and them like, But I realize now when I walk down the facade, everybody goes, "Hey, kako ste?" You know, it's like before it was, there she goes again. You know, so there's this warming from the people. There's a complete change in atmosphere. Igor, you told me yesterday, they treat you differently. They treat everybody differently. I mean, we are, you know, now much easier to work within the realms of this community. So we've already changed a lot with what is a very different architecture. And I just wanted to bring up another point that here, modern architecture means building a crappy new building with not much thought, out of concrete and lining it with stone tiles, because as long as the facade looks like it might have been built out of stone, it's in keeping with the architectural tradition of the Renaissance, which is we have to make once an art project about these. They're like bathroom tiles that are pretended to look like this nice stone wall you see over there. So, you know, introducing David AJ's architecture here, and as you know, it sort of now has become a little bit weathered, and the colors are fade, you know, and it just fits in with these nice olive trees. It isn't an eyesore, but it isn't trying to pretend to be local architecture either. I mean, it's far from that. And I think that is also something that might also introduce, from an architectural point of view, you can build something completely different without it becoming sort of an eyesore. I mean, you're young, you know, architects. Thinking of architecture, I really want to introduce Christopher, because, you know, now he's been sitting here for an hour and a half waiting to speak. But Christopher is married to NK, and they have been working for years on the revitalization of Orhan Valley with a number of different projects. And I think it would be really nice to end this session with something completely out of the world and exotic, and share with us some of your experiences and what are the primary intentions that you have. I mean, I'm going to turn all of Kosti's questions he asked me onto you, and then let you answer them for him.
I think it's very fascinating what you do here. And I think it's very fascinating that you work through a monastery and through a pavilion. I think those are really epicenters where you send out not necessarily shockwaves, but where you create attraction. One is an attraction to a tradition, and one is an attraction to constantly play with many new ideas. What I think, in comparison of what we do, we're living in a very remote area of Mongolia. Mongolia has a capital called Ulaanbaatar. First, Mongolia is the size of Western Europe. So it's Germany, England, France, Italy, all together. It's 1,500,000 square kilometers and only 2.5 million people, out of which 1 million live in one city, in Ulaanbaatar. So the countryside is not very heavily populated. We are in an area where historically the capital of the Middle Ages was situated, and where, let's say, in the Middle Ages the political power was structured from. We're living in an area called, the capital is called Karakorum, and it's a mountainous area, very, very beautiful, but very remote from, very isolated from all parts of Mongolia are in itself very isolated, and very isolated from of course, from the big city. Now, what we try to do there is to help people to stay in that area instead of going to Ulaanbaatar. The big move is to the city, as in many parts of the world, and this would be rather sad. In Mongolia, these other 1.5 million people, they are nomadic people, so they live with the herds, and they live off the land with the herds, but in no fixed structure, because herds may have to move, the goats have to move, the sheep have to move, the horses have to move because of the pasture. Because of the moving, you have a very interesting situation that you have no private property. So all the land in Mongolia, apart from the city itself, or from the little villages which do exist or have sprung up over the last 50 or 80 years. All the rest of the land is public land. So what we're trying to do is to make those people independent enough, financially independent enough that they are not attracted to go to the city, because the attraction of the city is, first of all, that's where you can make money. So one of the things we do, and this is probably something you can look into here, reviving the crafts. So the crafts would be some sort of masonry to build the tents. To build a tent you may need 2 or 3 people, and it may take you 2 or 3 months, the winter months, to carve the wood, to bend the wood, to join the wood, to do all this. So we are reviving the crafts. So with the crafts, again, they have access to eventually money to sell this. To the crafts also, we have felting crafts. Felt is very much used either as insulation material or as carpet material. So we are reviving the crafting of felt making, and we try to generate through that also enough money and enough attraction that schooling can be taken care of, and one of the things we introduced or reintroduced into Mongolia is polo. It may not seem obvious to you that the Mongols should play polo, but as it happened in the Middle Ages, polo was a game of the cavalry and everybody played it. Then it was forgotten, and we brought it back, and it has several effects. Number one, it brings people together again in a game, so it's not war anymore, it brings them together in a game. And secondly, it brings foreigners in who are quite fascinating, that polo is revived. Foreigners who are interested in horse sport, maybe in polo, brings foreigners in who then become help in local projects. So the crafting and the sports side suddenly has changed this Orkhon Valley. It's a small region, but in the last 10 years it has created an energy and some happiness and some social interaction, not just amongst themselves, but also with an outside world, which has a positive effect, that people are more content and less thinking that they would need to go to the city to find happiness. What I think here is obvious. One has to start some sort of agriculture. One has to start some sort of growing the vegetable. You have to have a restaurant where you eat the local fish, even though there will be the pizzeria and there will be many other restaurants and whatever this is all very well, but there has to be back the regional product, the regional place. You know, this has to come back, and it will be another little pillar in the society, which you may say, let's go to Lopud and eat fish from the Lopud Bay. You know, this has to come back. It's frightening that it's not here. So agriculture, fishing, wine making. I think
Polo.
Sorry.
Polo would be good here.
Polo.
It's a little bit hilly.
Some climbing courses.
There is you'll be surprised, but probably a few kilometers away is Brioni. There's an island.
Yeah, there is an island.
There's an island called Brioni, and Brioni was very, very famous in the 20s and 30s for polo. So there's a long history in this region. You know, polo was played at the beginning of the 20th century. Then the Second World War stopped it, and it is being revived now. But there's also a company, a textile company called Brioni. So they have a polo team, Loro Piana. It's now done by the Italians. So
Yes, they make very beautiful jackets.
So yes, it's done by the Italians, but this is, I think it's part of, it's on the agenda in this area. So one has to find a little bit what was Lopud before the Second World War.
I think we have to kind of interject something here, because when I wanted to organize next year an event at your camp, and I wanted to bring some outside musicians from Iceland, for instance, you absolutely said, no, we're just going to have the Mongolian traditional music there.
Okay,
And
I changed my mind.
know
I changed my
about
mind.
it, because
I am open.
So, you see, and I think also one of the things, and I think I'll sort of close this session with this thought, and it was something that Mark Wrigley, because I want to keep bringing them back somehow, at least in talk to this discussion, but he was saying, you know, one of the tragedies about restoration and revitalization, if you see it in Dubrovnik when you go there day after tomorrow, you know, you will find lots of, well, probably not now because it's not tourist season anymore, but they have these actors dressed in their velour gowns, you know, Renaissance velour gowns, sort of going around the streets singing like bard music and playing a little bit of an old mandolin guitar, and it's horrendous. And they have these little performances in shows in the evenings for the tourists where they all sort of dance around and have little, I mean, it's just, it's like Disney, you know, and, you know, I think that there's this emphasis always, when you revitalize something, to bring back the traditional dances and the traditional costumes. Remember in Savtat, in the little village of Chilipi, and they did incredibly well right after the wars, immediately to revive the tradition of the old ladies who dress in these black dresses, and they have these highly starched white folded caps that are really quite spectacular. And they do the singing and dancing after Mass every Sunday, and it became something that really brought people back out into Savtat, which was a very, very damaged area during the war and highly occupied. That village particularly was completely also destroyed. So it was the first step. But I think also the cottage industries of reviving folkloric art and pottery in many parts of South America or in Indonesia, all this, it does create an income, it does create a livelihood for people, but what I'm really missing is a focus and a platform for people to develop contemporary expression. Because absolutely living in the past and then this kind of dreadful swimming in nostalgia is for me just not enough. I think one can revitalize, you can rebuild, you can reconstruct, but you must reintroduce the fact that people will and always have been creative today. And in whatever we're looking at medieval architecture, this was new sometime maybe 400 years ago. So I think every generation has to be there to support its contemporary art practice in whatever field it is. And in these areas and in these regions and these sleepy islands, and especially in such a UNESCO World Heritage Center, sometimes the UNESCO World Heritage stamp is a killer. You can't do anything new there. It's everything focused and you know, then the European Union comes along and goes, let's make cultural centers out of hammams, because that's really kind of like something they figured as a good policy in Brussels without ever having gone to Pristina and known what that community really needs or even wants. Nobody's listening to them. So these are, you know, some of the points, and I mean, we could maybe spend some of the afternoon on the beach and talk about those, because I think it's nearly 2:30 and Dushka is going to be freaking out that we're not going over there to eat his kebabs and whatever. So please, if you wouldn't mind grabbing your bathing suits. And I'd like to thank everybody here in the panel to have shared what they did, and maybe we'll just continue the discussion on the beach. What do you say?
Yes.
Yeah?